10. On returning to his room, he tried to sleep, but his subconscious was in revolt, so sleep would not let him forget. He continued to chamfer the blade of his paper knife. The white wood glistened like Sheffield steel under the scoop of the chisel, and the hours were in no hurry. As darkness is the principle of the universe when all the suns are dead, he was constantly reminded that darkness would last forever. He began to feel his brain was a beech nut, continually being sucked dry. 4 o'clock. 4:30. He lay on the bed. He got up. He paced the room, backwards and forwards, forwards and backwards, like a traffic policeman, but his only traffic was the stars. 5:30. The first wet perfumes of dawn bled in his nostrils. The stars were beetroot purple. Then they gave in the good morning wind and made way for a sky of bluebells. 6 o'clock. Quietly, he left the breathing in the house and let himself into the street. He put on his sunglasses, anticipating the dawn. The raw sun was spreading its wound over the sky. The houses and cobblestones reflected the salmon fire. Everything was tinged with flesh. The street radiated rose to bronze to yellow as the sun took over England. No clouds, no wind, only sun in the pure ether. Suddenly the rhythms of summer blossomed in his body and he ran down the main street with dawn in his head. He skirted quickly through the woods. The birds' wind section went berserk, but he had not time to conduct. The sea was pulling him. A sting of salt tanged his nostrils. He didn't take his usual route. This time he branched to the left. This was the quickest way to the waves. Then he felt the familiar blow lamps on his shoulder blades. It must be Jippo, though I'm not sure. I've learnt not to be sure of anything. Kicking his way through the blackberries, he noticed a bat's wing pinned to an oak tree. The morning was getting off to its usual start. Hanlin smiled to himself. The blow lamps continued to probe his shoulder blades. I must admit, he's humorous if nothing else. Funny man. When he eventually clattered out of the wood, he saw a large house surrounded by high walls. It was only some 600 yards from the beach. He levered himself into the fork of a tree to see it better and looked behind him to see if he was still being followed. He wasn't. It was Creedy's manor house, not very attractive, a hodgepodge of late Tudor pink chimneys and ornate Victorian windows and doors. The walls were a recent acquisition. They had a chalky newness. You could see the back of the house clearly. All the curtains were drawn. There was a large summer house at the bottom of the lawned garden, hemmed in by trees. He felt they were covering more than primroses. Snagging a couple of threads in his jacket, he achieved ground again and sauntered down to the beach. The sea was a roar of green crystal. The sun licked the sea. Shells cracked under his feet. It was good. Murder does not exist at dawn. It belongs to the vampire hour. To spilt ink at sunset. Now murder and Anna's nipples surged unheard in the undercurve of the wave. He took off his all-night shoes and socks and allowed the freezing water to shudder his feet. His nerve ends tingled. It was very good. Sitting down, he cleaned the sand from between his toes. Then, with an impatient finger and thumb, he picked off a 3-month corn from his left little toe. He rolled the dead skin between his fingers. That's all that's thrust in the grave, then. 11.5 stone of human corn. My God, morbidity's arrived. We're in for a nice day. He played a quick ducks and drakes with a discus shell and watched it leapfrog the waves. He leaned back to throw a third shell when a hairless hand caught his wrist. David lifted his head back in the sun to see who had cast the first dice of the morning. Bull-horned moustaches jabbed towards him. It was one of the head settlers, Lawrence Creedy, great minor actor, retired, with the squire's family manor behind his name as his only official distinction. Don't waste your energy on throwing shells, my dear sir. Save it for spreading marmalade on toast. Join me for breakfast. Ah, thought Hanlin. The settlers are about to show their hand, or at least inform me which game we're playing. And maybe, if I'm lucky, the rules. With pleasure, Mr. Creedy. David levered himself to his feet. The two men walked towards the manor. I understand you acquired the manor from the reluctant squire, Mr. Creedy. True, unfortunate, but advantageous. Having misspent a lifetime in theatre, one learns to seize the opportunities at hand. As an actor, one is given them so rarely, and then, as I did, one misuses them. Or they misuse you. Either way, there's an overdraft. Squire Francis Fenn comes from a boggy family. He roared with laughter at his verbal mishap. David looked very serious. Yes, well, Inspector, I know it is a bad Elizabethan joke, but I always feel that bad Elizabethan is better than good modern. At least there's entrails behind it, and imagery. Always important when you're avoiding reality. You were telling me, Mr. Creedy, about how you came to own those chimney pots above us. Creedy opened the wrought iron gate. Yes, well, Sebastian Fenn, the squire's progenitor, left such a wreath of debts after his death that his son had to sell the manor to the highest bidder. Me. So the blackmail inference is untrue. Blackmail? My dear Inspector, on what grounds could I blackmail him? Perhaps he was involved in some satanic rites, Mr. Creedy. Child murder, the odd rape, sodomy. And I'm sure, Mr. Creedy, with your talent, you've dug up the personal histories of the moneyed members of this village. And now perhaps you're holding them to ransom for the sexual and sadistic misdemeanors. Perhaps. I feel you're having a little brainstorm, Inspector. Sodomy, murder, incest. I'm sorry, Mr. Creedy, I forgot incest. I understand it's as common as fish and chips in backwater villages. Though I must admit I haven't seen a fish and chip shop yet, but I can smell incest. Why, does it smell any different to the other kinds of fornication? Oh, Inspector, are you suggesting that I run some kind of university for debauchery and then blackmail all my members? Forgive the sexual analogy, but really, admittedly, I could blackmail the squire over something. Oh, I can imagine. Can you, Inspector? He led David into his tiled hallway. I could threaten to report him to the Royal Music Society for his abominable flute playing. Ah, you have noticed. I would not have thought you would have noticed such minor evil. Evil, Inspector? This is boy's own stuff, really? Yes, you're right. It is, Creedy. That's exactly what it is. What you villagers are doing is sickening comic horror stuff. Diseased children's games, murdering little girls, for example. But she wasn't sexually interfered with, was she? Surely they would have found that out at the inquest. I think, Inspector, you would like it to be murder, so you could destroy us. Our happiness revolts you. That's what I think, Inspector. Half of David's mind acknowledged that he had no proof it was murder, and yet he knew. His instinct rarely failed him. Even when it did, it usually opened other doors to corruption. David removed his sunglasses. Creedy led him past 2 large rooms to the breakfast room. The sun sneaked through the coloured glass. A bright dew lawn could be seen squared off by the window panes. In the centre of this Victorian room, a round table was set for 2. I knew you'd come, see, Inspector. I knew you couldn't resist. There's some very frenetic water flowing under your bridge. You're too instinctive and imaginative by half. You probe an impulse like a lover rather than a policeman. I don't entirely trust you, do I? No, I don't. Creedy pressed a small bell beside his place setting. A manservant, 30ish, good-looking in the Hollywood format, smoothed into the room. Creedy eyed him openly with relish. It was as if the marmalade and toast had made an entrance. Could we have toast and marmalade, please, Martin? And coffee. Black. Yes, and cream. Yes, and cream. Martin smiled. He was all gums, pink gums. His teeth were like 4-year-olds, very tiny and eager to bite anything. Absolutely anything. Martin left the room. David sat opposite Creedy. Creedy stood up and also left the room. David began to draw a bat in the dust on his plate. Strange the cutler is not clean, he thought. Then he realised the table setting had been arranged the night before. Creedy returned. We won't wait for breakfast here. It's nearly 7 o'clock now. The children will be here soon. Too late for breakfast. Martin will follow us into my museum and feed us toast and marmalade. Personally, it's very exciting. Another nutter, thought David. The village is entirely composed of nutters. I could have done with some breakfast. But hand-fed by a poor man's Gregory Peck is a little disillusioning. Creedy led him through a labyrinth of tiled corridors, up a flight of stairs, and along another tiled intestine. Finally, they reached a large, black, Gothic door. It was marked Museum. I suppose he keeps corpses in here for amateur necrophilia. Or maybe he's an expert on body perfume. Whatever it is, I know it won't be healthy. Still, that's what I'm paid for. Having spent 3 minutes selecting the correct Yale key, Creedy let David into the room. Once inside the museum, David quickly scrutinized the contents. Black silk drapes, funerally folded, hung on the black walls. The midnight room had only 1 window. It was about 3 feet high and a foot wide in the shape of a Gothic arch. The design of the glass was interesting. A triumphant portrait of Lucifer, with his taloned foot on the nape of Christ's neck. The symbolism was not subtle. There were purple shelves on the walls filled with purple books. The sign of the zodiac and the pentacle were balanced either side of the window. A black velvet-covered table was placed directly in front of the window, suggesting a portable altar. On top of it, jet candles reared their horns to salute Creedy's moustaches. 2 swords with giant silver swastikas were placed next to the candles. This, as you have probably gathered, my dear Inspector, is my witchcraft museum. So you're a dabbler, are you? You've twisted your nasty little mind into the occult, have you? Not so little, Mr. Hanlin, not so little. Look, Creedy, don't get excited, old man. As Creedy said this, he removed a tissue from his black trouser pocket and proceeded to polish the swords. I anticipate your questions before you ask them. One of my small talents. Now I want you to get this straight. There's nothing in this room that is real. Unfortunately, even this sword is electrically plated. The drapes are second-best silk, the stained glass very cheap, even my books on the subject are standard. Mind you, I have tried to get originals, the banned ones, but even the pornographic bookshops in Soho are of no assistance. They have all the smut, the perversions and flagellations, etc., but very little of the actual craft. No, please don't interrupt. So reluctantly, I must admit, I've only progressed ostentatiously with my hobby. I wanted to show you this room because I can feel the throb of what you're thinking, and it's not very nice, is it? In fact, it's very nasty. You think that witchcraft is rife in this village, don't you? I know it is. Oh, please don't interrupt. I would never have invited you had I known you were such a compulsive talker. As I was saying, you believe that witchcraft is rife in this village, don't you? Now, don't reply. Well, all I can say is that I wish it were rife, and then perhaps my knowledge and interest would develop. But I can assure you that this village is as dead as a staked vampire. Especially after sunset, though, to be honest, if the old religion possessed this village, I probably would be too frightened to be anything but a warlock voyeur. If such a person exists. No, Inspector, it's a dead art here, of course. In more advanced places like East Anglia and Scotland and Ireland, things are more excitingly black and hopeful. Creedy, I don't like calling people liars, especially when I have no proof, but... Well, don't then. It is libelous. But in your case, Creedy, I would stake my position that you're as murky as they come. And they come murky. Having pronounced his considered opinion, David lifted a heavy volume from the bookshelf and wafted his way through. Of course you can read my books, Creedy retorted, especially if you don't ask my permission. Would you care to throw the odd volume through the stained glass, or perhaps... This looks genuine enough to me. Detailed studies of advanced magic. How to spiral the mind over the abyss. The complete satanic rites. You certainly can't find this one at the Charing Cross Road. Creedy, I suspect you're the full initiate of the occult. I should think murder is hardly complex enough for you. There was a knock on the door. Martin entered with a tray of coffee, toast, and marmalade. David thrust the book back on the shelf, selected a piece of toast, marmaladed it, and munched it. My God, this toast's cold. So sorry, sir, simpered Gregory Peck, flirting his eyes towards Creedy. But it was hot when it left the kitchen, sir, but cooled during the journey. He set the tray down on the altar, deliberately provoking Creedy. Creedy stuttered with inarticulate anger. Get that bloody tray off the altar! Get it off! Martin lowered his sleek neck and picked up the tray. This time he sat it on the black carpet. He smiled indulgently, pouted his lower lip to a glistening pink oval, and left the room. He will pout once too often, and then I'll have him, seethed Creedy. David tabulated the remark on his brain slate. He stroked the velvet on the altar. Yes, Mr. Creedy, I think you're really evil. Very soon, today or tomorrow, I will crush you. Even though your health is on the decline, fortunately, real evil's hard to come by. It's rarely so blunt as yours. Usually it's studied, insidious, in fact, a profession. But it always has a definite smell of rotting flesh. It's the prologue to the final solution. I only need the proof, Creedy, and then I'll get you. You're bound to overplay your hand. That is one of the rules of evil. It's never satisfied of the simple act. It has to elaborate. Add the frills and the bat's wings. I need a definite action to clinch it. I'm sure you will oblige." Creedy moved the inspector's hand from the altar and led him to the bookshelf. He ignored everything David said. Only his teeth sweated. Quickly, he selected a thickish album from the shelf. He flicked through the pages, occasionally showing the inspector a photograph. It was Creedy's theatrical scrapbook. The pictures covered his varied career. "I was an actor, beloved for my cameos in the classics. My father, of course, was a vicar, so naturally I wanted to be a commando. But my father's disciplinary precautions made me study for the ministry. After 2 years of constant theology, I was already a great actor. Especially to myself. You need to be a good thespian to study 2 years of theology. My life has followed the usual pattern of a vicar's son. I'm an advanced atheist with a coy love for the devil. Actually, I met the devil once, clubfoot, phallic tail, brimstone fart and all, in a lady's public convenience, which was convenient as he was in fact a she, and as black as a licorice allsort. She told me confidentially that she was homosexual, but one should never believe the devil. During this diatribe, he showed David a photograph of himself in gangrene tights, playing Satan in a doubtful adaptation of Paradise Lost. Suddenly, he avoided showing the inspector a number of pages at the end of the scrapbook. "May I?" inquired the inspector. "No, they wouldn't interest you. They're pictures of a mutilated girl that I came across last summer. They would only be of interest to a sadist, first-class honours, Cambridge. They would bore you or make you puke, depending on your degree of decadence. No, please, I must insist you don't." David snatched the book from Creedy. He examined the pages in question. They were filled with photographs of Diane Spark. Head, shoulders, close-ups, and full lengths, lying in twisted positions on a lawn. Some of them were in colour and a few shots of her staring eyes in black and white. There was blood streaming down her neck from her mouth, and various blotches of blood on her bare arms and calves. She was dead.